debated Dr. Michael Martin of Boston University. He was at that time was America's leading philosophical and academic atheist, and it's still online. It was a transcribed debate. It was they called it the Internet debate. We made a little book out of it, and so this is my cumulative case for God. And what I did was I realized that public debates between Christians and atheists tended to be really, really unfair. Because the Christian was expected to prove God's existence either beyond all reasonable doubt or with absolute certainty, and all the atheist had to do was raise 3, 4, 5% doubt, and then they could claim victory. And so I just thought that was unfair. The atheist would claim, I'm not defending anything, I just lack belief in God. You have the belief, the burden of proof is on you. And they even changed the definition of atheist. Atheism used to mean that you believe no God existed. You believe that God does not exist almost with absolute certainty. And but then with Big Bang cosmology and the belief that the universe had a beginning, the only way to disprove God's existence with absolute certainty, you'd have to have the attributes of God. You'd have to be all-knowing, all-seeing. And so what a lot of atheists did was they became agnostics. But they still called themselves atheists. They redefined atheism as the lack of belief in God. In fact, in his book, Atheism, Philosophical Justification, Dr. Michael Martin actually argued for that, that they have nothing to prove, they just lack belief. The burden of proof is all on the Christian, and he argued that in his book, Atheism, Philosophical Justification. And so what I did was, I said, look, we got two worldviews. Which worldview is more plausible? So I tried to take the debate out of the criminal courts, where you have to prove your case beyond all reasonable doubt, and I tried to move it into the civil courts, which just says you got to prove your case based on the preponderance of the evidence. So I said, you got your worldview, it's atheism, you claim you just lack belief in God. No, you got a worldview. And you build your moral views, your intellectual views, all on that worldview. You got a worldview, I got a worldview. Which is more plausible? And let's look at the preponderance of the evidence. Now, I am not saying that you cannot prove God's existence with some type of certainty. I actually think Thomas Aquinas' third way to argue for God's existence, his argument for what's called existential causality, I actually think that he proves that for any finite being that exists, that has the possibility of non-existence, its existence, its continuing existence must be grounded by infinite necessary being, a being that cannot not exist. Okay? So basically what I'm saying is, if any finite being exists, and we do, then infinite being must exist. Okay? Now, having said that, trying to prove that argument, especially since it deals with Aristotle's philosophy and his views of causation, most college students, it just goes over their heads. They just don't understand it. Many of the world's leading philosophers misunderstand Aquinas and Aristotle on that. So I think what I'm saying is I think it can be done. I think we can prove God's existence with actual undeniability or existential necessity, actual necessity. But I don't see why I should have to in a debate. I think I should just be able to, if I could show that my worldview is more reasonable than your worldview, then you should lose the debate. And Gary Habermas listened to this this lecture on this told me he listened to it 2 or 3 times, and he really liked it. And all I'm saying there is, why should the burden of proof be on us? If we got 2 different worldviews, let's go head to head and see whose worldview holds more weight. So I kind of treat, just for purposes of a debate, I treat Christian theism as a hypothesis, and I argue that it's more reasonable to believe in the God explanation than it is to be an atheist. And so I say that theism offers a more adequate explanation than atheism does for common aspects of human experience. Okay? And so let's look at some of those common aspects of human experience. First off, the beginning of the universe. When Friedrich Nietzsche was an atheist, he died in 1900, okay? At the time that he was an atheist, the common belief of atheists is that the universe is eternal. It didn't have a beginning, therefore it doesn't need a cause, okay? In the 1920s, with Edwin Hubble and the observation that the universe is expanding as we move forward in time, that led to Big Bang cosmology. You go backwards in time, and the universe gets smaller and smaller until it reaches a point of infinite density. Well, that means it's not there. Something can only be finitely dense or finitely small or compact. If it's infinitely dense, it's not there. Sometimes they talk about the universe takes up, you go back far enough and it takes up no dimensions in space. If you're talking about a physical thing that takes up no dimensions in space, it takes up no space. It's not there. So they're picking fancy words to say that there was a time when the universe did not exist. Let me say this. I'm not convinced on Big Bang cosmology. Okay? I'm a young earth creationist. I'm in the minority among Christian apologists and philosophers. There are some brilliant ones like Dr. Richard Howe and Jonathan Sarfati that are young earth creationists like me. We're not in the majority. I'm not convinced of Big Bang cosmology, but the fact is we don't need it because we also have the second law of thermodynamics, energy deterioration. With the amount of energy in a closed system remains constant, closed system, no energy is coming from the outside, it remains constant, okay? But it changes forms as we move forward in time. And when it changes forms, it becomes less and less usable. So we're not running out of energy, we're running out of usable energy. The universe is winding down. Eventually the universe will die if left to itself. But that means that we go backwards in time, eventually we reach a point where all the energy in the universe was in a useful state, and that would mark the beginning of the universe. So at this particular point, the idea that the universe had a beginning is almost universally accepted by Christians and atheists, okay? There's philosophical arguments for why time had to have a beginning. I'll just throw a quick one out. I won't get into infinite set theory. You can read William Lane Craig on this in his work, Reasonable Faith. He's got a chapter on the Kalam cosmological argument where he deals with this. But if time didn't have a beginning, we would never reach the present moment now. Because you can't traverse an actual infinite set of moments. Okay? No matter, if time had no beginning, then time runs back infinitely, you would never reach the present moment now. Since you reach the present moment now, that means there had to be a first event in time. Okay? Time had to begin, the universe had a beginning. Well, whatever has a beginning needs a cause. It can't cause its own existence, because you'd have to pre-exist your own existence in order to bring your own existence about. That's absurd. You can't pre-exist your own existence. So everything that has a beginning has to have a cause, okay? Nothing is not a good candidate for a cause. Now, I'm a philosopher. I study philosophy of religion. So scientists, except for like theoretical physicists, they can deal with sci-fi if they want. But most scientists have to study things. A philosopher can get paid just for studying nothing. So I've become real advanced in my research on nothing. Sometimes I spend hours, sometimes weeks, studying absolutely nothing. And what I found is that, you can think, maybe you're thinking, gee, should I have come to this conference? I'm going to tell you some profound stuff here about nothing. And so the next few points, if they're not in your notes, write them down. Nothing, this is what I found. Nothing is nothing. you say, this is worth the money right there. Nothing is nothing, okay? Well, if nothing is nothing, then nothing can do nothing, okay? And that tells us that nothing can cause nothing. So if something has a beginning and it needs a cause, nothing is not a good candidate. It's got to be something else. And guess what? When the universe had a beginning, you've run out of natural causes. So by definition, whatever the cause for the beginning of the universe was, it has to be supernatural. Okay? And so the debate between Christians and atheists is really, it's either in the beginning God or in the beginning nothing created the heavens and the earth. So I don't know why we have to apologize as if we're the ones with blind faith. This is why my old professor Norm Geisler and my friend Frank Turek co-authored the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Okay? But, I mean, the media's on their side. The universities are on their side. Everything's stacked against us. Billions of dollars stacked against us, so it makes us sound like the fools. But in the end, it's either in the beginning, a miracle-working God created the universe, or in the beginning, nothing created the universe. I got the power to lift weights. I had Buddhist students from Japan, and they were telling me that nothing created the universe. And I said, look, I got power to lift weights, and but I don't have the power to make dirt, grass, make the universe. They laughed. They thought that was funny. And I said, but nothing can't lift weights. I lift way more weights than nothing. What makes you think nothing could make the universe? And then they talked to each other, and their spokeslady said, we don't want to talk anymore. I think since the universe had a beginning, it's more reasonable to be a theist and believe that God created the universe than it is to believe that the universe popped into existence out of nothing, totally without a cause. Now, again, you can use this as a strong argument for God, or you can just say, hey, I just think it's more reasonable, more plausible that God created the universe than not. By the way, I had Albin, my old student from Sweden, brilliant 18-year-old atheist, but very honest. And so he acknowledged that that's true, but maybe 100 years from now, atheist scientists will find this eternal source of all the energy in the universe, this invisible eternal source of all the energy in the universe. I said fine, but two things. Number one, you haven't found it yet, so you're talking sci-fi. Don't tell people that science backs atheism. You're saying maybe 100 years from now this will be proven. I said number two, infinite eternal source of all the energy in the universe. That's what I call God. So you're not an atheist anymore. You believe in God. Now the question is God a non-personal force? Is it Luke Skywalker and the Force be with you? Or is it the Apostle Paul and the Lord be with you? So is God personal or not? And it's sad too, because the very next day he went right back to being an atheist. I talked a little bit about the continuing existence of the universe. All existence, if everything that existed has the possibility of non-existence, then given enough time, every possibility for non-existence will be actualized and nothing will exist. But that means if you go backwards in time far enough, that same scenario would have obtained and nothing would exist. But since from nothing, nothing comes, and something now is, something has to be eternal, with no possibility of non-existence, that grounds the continuing existence of everything else that exists. Okay? If you don't follow along on that, it's not the end of the world. I'd recommend that you read Aquinas' Third Way. It's only a paragraph long. His Third Way, he's got 5 ways to prove God's existence. Read his Third Way. Then you get a guy like Edward Feser, it's F-E-S-E-R, guys like that explain what Aquinas means by that. And but whatever the case, something has to be eternal with no possibility of non-existence, a being that cannot not exist, a necessary being that is pure, infinite, eternal existence in order to ground all the possible existence, all the finite existence. And I think that's the most powerful argument for God. But again, I think just the fact that finite beings with a possibility of non-existence continue in existence, it's more likely that theism is true than atheism. The design and order found in the universe. We now know a single-celled animal contains enough genetic information, it's called specified complexity, highly complex information, to fill 20,000 volumes of encyclopedia. If you get explosions in a print shop, you're not going to get one encyclopedia by accident, one volume of encyclopedia, let alone 20,000 volumes. Evolutionists will point to mutations. Mutations only garble the already existing genetic code. It adds no new information. For evolution to be true, you need new information, okay? Explosions also do not cause more order and complexity. You know, I asked Dan Barker, you can still look it up on the internet. When I debated him back in 2000, it was on February 29th, it was a leap year, and I asked him, because he said that the Big Bang caused all the order and complexity we find in the universe, or the apparent order and complexity. And I said, well, give me an example of an explosion that produced more order and complexity, rather than taking things from a state of order and complexity to a state of chaos and disorder. And he said, well, the Big Bang. I said, no, that's what we're debating. Right. If it's a scientific statement that the Big Bang explosion caused all the order and complexity, and by the way, continues to produce even more order and complexity, supposedly, give me an example of that happened somewhere else. And then he was freaking out, and then he said, my wife tells me we need milk. I go into the car, I put the key in the ignition, I turn it, and a little spark, a little explosion happens. And then I was like, oh, Lord, help me. I didn't think he was going to have a comeback. And then it dawned on me. I said, well, you'd have to admit that a car engine needs an intelligent designer. And he said, of course. And I said, thank you. That's another good argument for theism. And then the whole audience laughed, okay? Explosions don't cause more order and complexity. Let me say this about the Big Bang, though. They're now talking about the Big Bang more inflationary, and they're kind of getting away from the explosion type of metaphor, if you call it that. But they're shying away from it, and I think it's because they've been called out so many times. Dr. Toyle and Wickramasinghe, two of Great Britain's leading evolutionists, tried to figure out what are the chances of life evolving from non-living material on the planet Earth without intelligent intervention. Their research concluded that it would be the same as the chances of a tornado randomly running through a junkyard and accidentally producing a fully functional Boeing 747. So they said it can't happen. By the way, you got the intelligent design movement out here with the Discovery Institute. That's supposed to be, evolutionists say that's a great big failure. Stephen Meyer, Jonathan Wells, it's a big failure and all. Well, if it's a big failure, guys, because they're arguing you can't get life from non-life on planet Earth without intelligent intervention. That's what they're arguing. If they failed, then how come you guys are going to outer space now? How come you guys are starting to say panspermia? Either on purpose or accidentally, primitive life was somehow transported to the planet Earth, maybe on an asteroid. Panspermia is becoming more and more popular, okay? I used to argue evolution needs God, but God doesn't need evolution, okay? If evolution occurred, it would still take a God to bring something from nothing, life from non-life, multi-celled animals from single-celled animals, animals with backbones from animals without backbones, intelligence from non-intelligence, the list goes on and on. But once you acknowledge the existence of God, okay, then he doesn't need evolution. He could have used this bloody method of evolution, Or he could have created the universe in 6 literal days if he felt like it. But now I've had to update my argument, so now I have to say, you know, aliens need God, but God doesn't need aliens. If there's beings on other planets, it's because God created them. They would still need God. But once you acknowledge that God exists, if he only wanted life on planet Earth, he could have created this vast universe just to remind us how majestic and how powerful he is. And so different types of intelligent design. We talked about specified complexity, the highly complex information found in all living things in the cell. There's irreducible complexity. Michael Behe out of Lehigh University, he said, look, in Darwin's day, they didn't know what was inside of a molecule. Okay? So they thought that Darwin assumed molecules were very simple and that we look complex because we're a bunch of simple molecules thrown together. Okay? But Michael Behe said, but that's outdated. We've now looked at the submolecular level and we found entities that are as complicated as spaceships or computers, yet they're irreducibly complex. And by that, what he means is, if you just remove one part, or if one part doesn't function properly, the thing doesn't survive long enough to evolve into something else. It had to be created that way, as complicated as spaceships or computers. And so that's irreducible complexity. The anthropic principle, Hugh Ross goes to town on this, the old Earth creationist, where, I mean, you just change a few things, either in our solar system or in the far reaches of the universe. You just change the chemical composition by 1 or 2%, and there'd be no possibility of life on the planet Earth. I mean, if the sun was just a little closer to the Earth, we'd all fry. If the sun was a little bit further away from the planet Earth, we'd all freeze to death. Okay, the moon controls the tides. The revolution of the Earth around the sun, the rotation of the Earth, Jupiter, asteroids that would destroy all life on the planet Earth on a pretty regular basis get caught up in Jupiter's gravitational pull and then get destroyed in Jupiter's atmosphere. So scientists came up with the title anthropic principle from the Greek word anthropos for man, which says that it appears as if the universe, the entire universe, and especially our solar system, was fine-tuned to support human life on the planet Earth. Then what they do is they come up with their own anthropic principle and they try to explain why that's not the case. Because if you do science, you're supposed to go where the empirical evidence leads. You're not supposed to make a living writing books trying to explain away what the empirical evidence tells you. Okay? And so you could add to this list types of intelligent design. Aquinas is it's either his fourth or his fifth way to argue for God's existence. He basically argued that when the mindless things of nature move towards the same goals time and time again, like acorns grow up to be oak trees, they don't grow up to be apple trees. Okay? That means there's got to be a mind behind nature, guiding and governing the mindless things of nature. So Aquinas, even if evolution were true, Aquinas would argue just the fact that natural laws are operating in that way with the mindless things of nature, God would have to exist. So there's a lot of different areas where we can find intelligent design, and intelligent design needs an intelligent designer. Possibility of human knowledge, the validity of human reason, that we trust our reason. C.S. Lewis went to town on this in his book, I believe it was his book, Miracles. But could consciousness and our thinking ability randomly evolve from matter? Or is it more reasonable that we were created by a rational being and in his image? Okay? So atheism cannot account for the validity of human reason. I think it was a philosopher, last name of Taylor, that said if a lady's on a train entering Wales, she's never been there before, and she sees on the side of the hill rocks that spell out, "Welcome to Wales." And that's going to represent human reason. she's free to believe that those rocks randomly rolled down the hill and accidentally spelled out "Welcome to Wales." She's free to believe that, but if she believes that, then she should not trust the message, because it's not really a message. The naturalists or physicalists, they believe only matter exists. Well, what about thoughts and values and truth? I asked Dan Barker, I kind of borrowed it from Greg Monson, the late presuppositional apologist. I asked Dan Barker, when I debated him, how much does a thought weigh? And the whole audience started laughing. Stupid Christian, thinks you can weigh a thought. And then they stopped laughing when Dan Barker said, "Oh, you can weigh a thought." Okay, come on, people, you should still be laughing. Now you should be laughing at him, but you're not. But he said, "Oh, you can weigh a thought." I said, "Oh, okay." So this is before 9/11. So he's using Oklahoma City bombing and Timothy McVeigh. Why would God allow that as an argument against God? And he said, "You could weigh a thought." And I said, "So are you saying that a thought is a chemical reaction that occurs inside a person's brain?" And he said, "Yeah." And then I said, "Well, then why are you so tough on Timothy McVeigh? He was just responding to a brain squirt." Okay? And we put people in prison. Dan Barker wants that guy in prison. I think he got executed too. Why though? If I didn't show up because I got sick, you don't say, "Boy, that Dr. Fernandes, what a jerk. He decided to catch the flu." No, that was biologically determined. But if Dan Barker is correct, if you could weigh thoughts, then it was biologically determined that Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City building. He's not responsible for his actions. But we treat people like they are responsible for their actions, which seems to imply deep down inside we know that our actions and our choices are not biologically determined. If that's not an argument for the soul, the human soul, I don't know what is. But by the way, getting back to eternal unchanging truths, if atheism is true, if there be a materialist and there's no, because truth, you can't weigh a truth, you can't bounce it, you can't throw it, okay? Truth is not physical. If atheism is true, then there would be no truth, therefore atheism has to be false. And that's where atheists have kind of really watered down their atheistic belief system. Now they're actually agnostics, but they just changed the definition of atheism into agnosticism. Universal, eternal, unchanging moral laws. Okay? Look, if the moral standard, we all make moral judgment. If you're human, you make moral value judgments. People say, "No, there's no such thing as right and wrong," and then they slam Christians all the time. But if there's no moral standard, no moral laws, why do you keep messing with and condemning Christians? The moral standard, these people say, "Okay, well, there's a moral standard, but each individual makes their own." Okay, guess what? We can't condemn Adolf Hitler. But everybody wants to condemn Hitler and Stalin, Bin Laden, okay? So they can say, "Okay, well, it's not the individual, each society determines what is right and what's wrong." We've heard the other speakers talking on this. Every moral reformer tried to change their society for the better, like a Martin Luther King Jr. Or a Jesus. They'd automatically be wrong because society's always right. But America wants to condemn the Taliban. Our society wants to condemn Nazi Germany. Okay? So we're appealing to a moral standard above individuals, above societies. So some would say, well, maybe it's a world consensus. But that was mentioned earlier as well. World consensus, the world consensus used to be slavery. It's perfectly okay. Get used to it. The woman is nothing but the property of the man. Okay? So the world consensus was wrong in the past. What makes us think it's going to be right now? And by the way, most of the time I don't even know what the world consensus is. I don't believe CNN when they take their polls. In fact, man, did they get African countries wrong. They're interviewing all these leaders from African countries who still believe homosexuality. One called it disgusting. Another called it a sin. Another one said to you, Americans got to stop, mind your own business. Don't tell us how to run our societies. 99% of my people believe homosexuality is wrong. And, but whatever the case, a world consensus, let me say, even atheists try to change the world consensus because they think there should be more atheists. So they're appealing to a moral standard above all individuals, above all societies, and above any world consensus. So even atheists try to build a better world. Also, atheists will condemn the past and try to build a better future. Okay? So when you add all this up, their actions speak louder than words. Their actions appeal to a standard above all individuals, above all societies, above any world consensus, and it's a standard that doesn't change with time. Well, then I think it's reasonable to conclude that this implies a moral lawgiver, above all individuals, all societies, any world consensus, and this moral lawgiver doesn't change with time. And again, we can just bring it back. Because of our moral experience, it's more likely that a moral God exists than that he doesn't exist. The meaning of life. Life is absurd if there is no God and no life after death and no punishment and reward. It would be irrelevant whether you live like Corrie ten Boom, who risked her life and the lives of her family members to defend innocent Jewish people, or if you lived your life like Adolf Hitler and you slaughtered innocent Jewish people. You know, a million years from now, everybody they influenced for good or for bad will be long gone and non-existent. Eventually the whole universe is going to just blow up. It makes no difference whatsoever. So there's no eternal difference between Corrie ten Boom and Adolf Hitler without God and life after death. Yet everybody lives like life has meaning, like life is not absurd. Like Jordan Peterson, who last I heard he's still not a Christian, but he's a Jungian psychologist who believes the Bible is just filled with myths, but these myths teach eternal truths that has caused the West to be the most prosperous, most healthy, most successful civilization in the history of mankind. But when he debates on God's existence, he tells the atheist, you showed up for the debate, I won. Because you act like life has meaning, life is meaningful. You brush your teeth in the morning, you got washed, you threw clothes on. You act like God exists. You say you don't believe in God, but you sure do live like he exists. And so life is absurd if there's no God and no life after death. Some other common aspects that I think it's more reasonable to be a theist and believe in God than to be an atheist. A reason to be optimistic about the future, to have hope. And it kind of dovetails on what I stated earlier. We all get up in the morning like life is worth living. We all plan, even the atheists, they plan out their lives and they move forward. I mean, why? I mean, some people come into this world and accomplish virtually nothing and then they die. Other people accomplish a real lot and then they die. And if non-existence is at the end of it, the people who accomplished a lot didn't do any better than the people who accomplished nothing. So why be optimistic about the future? Why have hope? Atheist points out evil. Number one, they can't define evil. Evil is a privation or a corruption of that which is good. And if you take the all-good God out of the picture, I don't know, the evil cannot exist without the good. The good can exist without evil. God created a perfect universe. Before it fell, everything was good. And but evil can't exist without the good. So even William Lane Craig says, if evil exists, God exists. Evil exists, therefore God exists. And but if evil does exist, so it's not. What I'm saying, evil is not just some philosophical, hypothetical problem that you talk about in a philosophy lecture hall. Evil is an existential problem. It's a problem of human existence. Real problems necessitate real solutions. If we don't have a real solution to the problem of evil, then in the end, the evil wins. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Now, I believe there's a guarantee that evil will be defeated. Because I believe in the incarnation, the death, resurrection, and return of the Lord Jesus Christ to the planet Earth. And but we all live like it's worth fighting evil. Feelings of guilt. I did not think this was a strong argument for God when I first became a believer, and then I started reading Sigmund Freud. And the guy's spending hundreds of pages trying to explain away guilt. Believe me, I don't even want to talk about how he explained away guilt. I mean, it's really dumb. But the first tribe of humans, the males wanted to have sexual relations with their moms. The dad was polygamous. Now, I don't know. Sigmund Freud probably had issues. I was never attracted to my mom that way. And so they banded together and they killed him. Then they felt bad about killing him. It's like, you're not explaining guilt, you're just putting it in there. Why would they feel guilty about killing? And then they chopped them up and ate them in a sacrificial meal. They personified nature so they could pray to nature so that to save us, and made it the Father image to save us from floods and earthquakes and things of that sort. It's like, you know what? Why not just concede that this universal feeling of guilt is because deep down inside we all have knowledge that we've done something wrong? By the way, when you sin and you're all alone and nobody's looking, and there's no person that's hurt by it, you still feel guilty. And I would argue persons are more important than things, and laws are things. So if you sin and nobody's watching you, the reason why you feel guilty, because deep down inside you know you've offended at least one person. I would argue you offended 3. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the feelings of guilt. He talked about, John was talking about the atheist who acknowledged he prays at night. Okay? I used to think of it as self-talk. When I was a non-believer and I was questioning God's existence, when I became a believer, the self-talk continued, except I was addressing God, and then it dawned on me, when I was a non-believer and claimed I didn't believe in God, the reason why I would cry out and scream when I was having a hard time and nobody was around to hear me, because I knew somebody was around to hear me. I knew somebody was listening. And it's the same way with guilt. Fear of death. I'm not talking about fear of dying. It's like you're dying. It's like what comes after death. People are much more likely to call for their favorite priest or preacher than they are their favorite atheist philosopher. 2 final aspects: human rights, respect for human life. In a world without God, there are no human rights. If you walked in here today and you saw me kicking a mound of dirt, you might think, man, this Fernandes guy is kind of weird. But you wouldn't go run up to Dwayne, get this guy out of here. He's a mess. But if you walked in, you saw me kicking a human being, you'd be ticked off. Well, guess what? If atheism is true, there's really no difference. It's just mere molecules in motion. Humans are nothing more really than dirt.